Welcome to the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, our weekly live stream where we answer a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. I'm Joshua Feinberg, your host and founder of DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And if this is the first time that you're joining us for our weekly live show, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. Please let us know in the comments what you do in the data center industry. We'd love to know. If you've been with us before, welcome back. We're thrilled to have our frequent flyers joining us as well. Regardless of what you do in the data center ecosystem, perhaps your company is a data center operator, data center provider, or some kind of data center technology or data center facilities related company, or perhaps your firm does something related to construction, real estate, or you're an investor in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure, or maybe you're part of the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem in and around the global data center industry. And this show is for you, regardless of what you do on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of marketing or sales or account management or product or innovation, or if you have an indirect playbook, perhaps you work in some facet of channel partnerships, or maybe you're the executive sponsor, the leader that goes out into the marketplace and recruits in the best and the brightest and gets the people sitting in the right seats on the bus, rowing the boat at just the right speed, playing their musical instruments at the right tempo, at the right time, and at the right volume to make this magical symphony of growth for your firm happen throughout the global data center, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure ecosystem. If you want to make sure that you stay up to date, stay in the loop on any new educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can sign up for free. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda for today? We're first going to look at data center operators, and in particular, how a network infrastructure, co-location, and managed hosting company can hire great people. After that, we'll get into how a new data center services company can establish its reputation. Then we'll shift our attention to how a data center design and build firm attracts clients. After that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a data center facilities construction business can improve how clients purchase its offering. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a data center operations optimization company can generate leads. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll talk about how a data center construction, installation, and maintenance company can improve its direct sales. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you, your team, your company is currently facing in your go-to-market approach, and you think it's something that we should address in one of our upcoming shows, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for topics for upcoming episodes. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question. What do we got? How does a network infrastructure, co-location, and managed hosting company hire great people? How can a network infrastructure, co-location, and managed hosting company hire great people? So the first thing is, whenever someone describes their business model with a series of topics or disciplines that are related but may not be exactly the same thing, network infrastructure, colo, and managed hosting, let's first make sure that you have a really tight degree of integration between those lines of business within your company. And the reason that's especially important is so many companies within co-location and hosting and data center operators in general grow through mergers and acquisitions, M&A, rather than just growing organically. And as a result, there's sometimes anywhere from a little bit of lag time to significant lag time between integrating 2, 3, 4 different kinds of product lines, services lines, locations, regions. For the sake of keeping this simple on your recruiting plan, a hiring plan, we're going to go with the idea that either this growth has happened 100% organically, or you've done a fantastic job of integrating these 3 lines. So the question is, do you have separate team members that are involved in marketing, selling, provisioning, servicing, and supporting infrastructure, co-location, and managed hosting, or is it largely one and the same? Is it the same network operations center? Is it the same support team? Is it the same cybersecurity folks? Is it the same professional services if you offer managed IT services to your clients? Or do you end up having multiple teams? If it's generally a team for each discipline, as opposed to splitting up and splintering those teams into further divisions by those product lines, it makes it way easier. So the big thing that I'd be thinking about is everyone has been running around for the last couple of years in this industry like Chicken Little, that there's just not enough good talent to go around. And the average age of the person that's working in the data center industry is a baby boomer, and they're retiring, and there's going to be nobody to take these jobs. And there is some truth to all of that. However, the reality is it's actually considerably more complicated. The reality is we start to see generational divides to a certain degree among preferences for how people navigate job choices. However, when you're looking at essentially marketing and selling your job opportunities to IT professionals, these IT professionals have very different preferences for how they deal with all different kinds of companies compared to as recently as 10 years ago, because their buyer preferences for when they're a network manager or co-location operations person or managed hosting account manager, their preferences that they utilize when they're going out to look at new tools or new services they can subcontract or looking at hiring are very, very similar to what they face on the candidate side. And a lot of people are in denial about how much the world has changed. Like 10 years ago, a typical IT professional would do about half of their researching and comparing of options and evaluating different vendors on their own, and then they'd fill out a form to schedule a time to essentially talk to sales. Sometimes it was dressed up a little nicer, like schedule a free consultation, get a preliminary audit, or in the case of a co-location facility, schedule a tour to come on down and see our facility. But for the most part, 10 years ago, even though mobile adoption and search and social media were pretty well entrenched among IT professionals, it wasn't so entrenched that people expected to do all of this research 100% on their own without talking to a human. So at the time, 10 years ago, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, found that 56%, a little over half of their journey, was over before they were willing to have contact with a human. And most of this research was done in the context of purchase decisions. But when it comes to candidates deciding where to work, they're essentially purchasing where they're going to spend some of the best years of their careers. So it is striking the amount of parallels that you see between marketing and selling your products and services and marketing and selling your opportunities. So much so that when it comes to how DCSMI segments the data center industry, we have 5 general groupings. We have data center operators, data center technology companies, data center facilities companies, data center construction / real estate / investment companies. That's group number 4. And group number 5 is outsourced sales and marketing. And when it comes to data center recruiters, and wow, are data center recruiters having a moment now of incredible amounts of growth and opportunities? People often ask us, where do you place data center recruiters? Well, we consider data center recruiters part of outsourced marketing and sales, outsourced sales and marketing. Why? Because they're essentially hired by their clients, the hiring managers, to go out into the marketplace and market and sell specific job opportunities to join the client's company. So when you think of it like that, it's perfectly reasonable to realize that recruiting, talent acquisition for sure needs its own marketing and sales playbook. And if you're leaning on that marketing and sales playbook to look identical to how it looked and how it functioned 10 years ago, you may be in for a world of disillusionment, disappointment, because in the same way I mentioned just a few moments ago, IT professionals would 10 years ago get about halfway through their journey and they're ready for human contact. That 56% number has now jumped to 83%. We think it's actually accelerated even more than that. What does that mean? 83% of researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, or in this case, evaluating salary ranges, happens before human contact. 83%. That means the best case scenario as a talent acquisition professional, as a hiring manager, you're completely out of the loop of the conversation, of the research process that's going on with that candidate until they're almost ready to take a new job. 83% of the game is over. If you're lucky, you're in there for the final 17%. You'd be like, well, how is it that the candidate is getting this far along without talking to a human? It's real simple. They're doing self-guided research. They're asking tons of questions of their peers on LinkedIn. They're watching YouTube videos. They're listening to podcasts. They're attending webinars. And most of all, those chat apps, the LLM, the large language model, generative AI chat apps that are fueling the insane amount of growth in our industry, guess what those apps represent? Human competition, competition to the humans. So the question is, do your hiring managers, do your talent acquisition TA professionals in your company, are they providing more value than a candidate can get from having it then compared to having a conversation with ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or Perplexity or Claude? Or do your candidates have a lot more fun and get a lot more value, a lot more satisfaction from having the conversations as far along in their career journey and their candidate looking to change jobs journeys as they can? And we're seeing this happen all over the place. And it's be wildly hypocritical to think that all of the crazy growth that's happening in your data centers because of generative AI, that all of a sudden the highly technical, highly cynical, sales allergic IT professionals that you're selling these job opportunities, no. They're going to completely forget that LinkedIn exists and YouTube exists. They're going to completely forget about ChatGPT and Copilot and Grok and all the other tools. And they're going to say, oh, I'm going to talk to recruiters the way I did 10 or 15 years ago. You know what? Where's the phone book? What did I do with that big 300-page trade journal that came in the mail in 2004? Where's my fax modem? Oh, my BlackBerry. I got to find it. It's crazy stuff that people actually believe that IT professionals haven't drastically changed how they're deciding where they're going to go work. And it's incumbent on most people in this space. And this is why we're seeing so many in-house talent acquisition folks facing insane amounts of pressure from external recruiters, because in both cases, very few people in those professions are doing a good job of keeping up with buyer preferences. The ones that are, without a doubt, are recognizing that they need to get out of the vendor box. They need to stop being seen as recruiters or headhunters or internal recruiters. And they instead need to be seen a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders. And when it comes to the external equivalents of this, the data center specialized recruiters, the ones that stand out to me are the ones that take this so seriously that not only are they doing all the old school running around and speaking and moderating panels at offline conferences, they're also knocking it out of the park when it comes to digital thought leadership. They're starting podcasts. They're hosting their own webinar panels. They're recognizing that they need to build their own media company to protect the future of their brand from being commoditized by the very AI tools, the very AI platforms that are fueling all of this growth for their candidates and for their hiring managers. So when it comes to hiring great people, not only do you see the emergence of the talent acquisition and the recruiter needing to have a strong professional brand, you're increasingly seeing a ton of specialization, meaning that of the handful of data center recruiters that I've had on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast in the last several months, quite a few of them are specializing. Actually, all of the ones I've had on the podcast are specializing. One in particular that was based in Singapore, I think he's in the process of moving, but specialized for several years just in data center industry opportunities in Asia Pacific. So much so that he co-hosts a weekly live stream called Data Center News Asia. That's Reese Morgan. Another data center recruiter that I've had on the podcast, James Wilkinson, is based in the UK, a couple hours north of London and Manchester. And he specializes in construction, the 4 or 5 different kinds of job opportunities and companies that come up that are directly and indirectly related to data center construction. And back in the US, another person that I've had on the podcast, Roxanne Saponik from JP Partners, specializes in data center construction as well, and the adjacent and directly adjacent. So, and I've had conversations with other data center recruiters that are either specializing geographically or specializing vertically or both. So when it comes to hiring great people, whether you're an internal talent acquisition, whether you're a hiring manager, whether you're an external recruiter, in order to compete for the best and the brightest professionals to fill these network infrastructure jobs, these co-location jobs, and these managed hosting jobs, it's incumbent upon you to show up very, very prominently in several of the touch points that a candidate goes through in their self-guided journey between cold candidate and someone accepting a new position. The reality too is, especially for external recruiters, is there's really 2 different playbooks that you need to have going on simultaneously. There's your candidate funnel and your hiring manager funnel. And the good news, the bad news, or just the reality is both groups, the candidates and the hiring managers, want a self-driven buyer's journey. So if you have last updated your website 5 years ago, and the last time you posted on LinkedIn was 6 months ago, and you only tend to share really selfish content that doesn't educate and build trust, this is the wake-up call. This is the existential deer in the headlights moments where you should be looking at like, wow, I never thought of it like that. All the generative AI chat apps that are fueling this crazy amounts of growth in data center development. Oh yeah, that's potentially a threat to the humans that are in the business of putting the hiring manager and the candidates together. And I need to really up my game to remain relevant, to be seen more like the teacher and the consultant and the subject matter expert and the trusted advisor. I'm not telling you that you need to immediately go out and start a podcast, or that you need to go with a live stream once a week, or be putting out hundreds of pieces of content on LinkedIn and YouTube all the time. But what I am telling you is the IT professionals that you're looking to build relationships with, both as candidates and hiring managers, are more sales allergic than they've ever been before in their careers. They're more craving the self-driven journey. With the course of hosting this live show, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and examining 6 go-to-market scenarios every week of the year, that's over 300 go-to-market playbooks over the course of the year, we have yet to find a significant pocket in any of the 57 business models in the data center industry where there's core personas that aren't deeply, deeply pushing for more self-driven journey, more self-service tools. Of these 57 business models, it's nearly impossible to find core buyer personas that don't have an Android or iPhone smartphone with them pretty much every waking hour of the day. Along the same lines, in those 57 business models, in those core business and those core personas, it's nearly impossible to find core buyer personas where there's not already outrageously high level of adoption of chat based search as opposed to traditional search. And all of those changes spell some challenges for the future of what it looks like to be hiring, recruiting, talent acquisition, internal and external recruiters. So if you want to continue to hire great people, recognize that the competitive battleground that you relied on 10 years ago, which for most people was a lot of cold calls, a lot of cold emails, a lot of cold LinkedIn, and a lot of schmoozing people at conferences and hotel lobby bars and golf tournaments and taking people to professional sporting events, those still somewhat have their place. But the reality is we are so connected 7 by 24 by 365 days a year. People are so craving immediate gratification. And the trust of anything and everything having to do with sales, marketing, recruiting is at such a historic low that leading with education is incredibly important to getting out of the vendor box and staying out of the vendor box. And when it comes time to candidates trusting your employer brand, this is a whole new marketing and sales challenge that most companies, frankly, are completely overlooking. Because if they weren't overlooking it, instead of looking at marketing and sales as marketing as the basic lackeys, as the gophers of the sales team, they would recognize that the exact same kinds of content marketing and event marketing chops that are required for sales, that are also required for channel partnerships, that are also required for products, are also just as much required for recruiting, for employer marketing, in terms of having success stories, in terms of having videos, in terms of having employee advocacy. If you want to recruit the best and the brightest, it's time to think about what it takes to level up on your game. So these are some of the building blocks that I'd be thinking about for a network infrastructure, co-location, and managed hosting company that wants to hire great people across all of the positions in its company. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you help us spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching on. So what's our next question? What's our next topic that we're going to look at this week? So our next question deals with what's likely a data center technology focused company, but may also be a little bit data center facilities related as well. So this question is all about how a new data center services company can establish its reputation. How a new data center services company can establish its reputation. So again, we're talking about a company that likely spans one or more subsets of data center technology and one or more subsets of data center facilities. It's very unlikely that they're spanning all 22 facets of data center technology and all 13 segments within data center facilities. That would require being an expert at 35 different areas, which would be nearly impossible for a new company. Usually what ends up happening with a new company is the founder, co-founders, the founding team brings a certain amount of skill set, brings a certain amount of career experience, CV experience, LinkedIn profile experience that each have had collectively in different parts of the data center ecosystem in the previous years, perhaps even in the previous decades, before they decided to start up this new firm. So as a result, usually if you look at those 22 segments within data center technology and those 13 segments within data center facilities, you'll in general want to take a skills inventory. And that skills inventory will help you develop your initial services menu. And that services menu, if you do that the right way, will mean that for each one of those categories of services, it will get some real estate on your website homepage. And for sure, each one of those categories of services should have their own sub page on your website under your main services page. So in other words, let's say that you're a data center services company that focuses on technology, and across your founder, co-founder skill set, there's deep expertise in hardware, software, cybersecurity, and storage. So what that means is when it comes to mapping out, planning out your website architecture, there should likely be 4 different boxes and buttons and pictures on your homepage that lead to the page for hardware, the page for software, the page for cybersecurity, the page for software. And they should be linked to these sub pages that specifically address the kinds of data center hardware, the kinds of data center software, the kind of data center cybersecurity, the kind of data center storage that you get involved with. And if you're doing this really well and you're leaning into the self-driven buyer's journey where we need to educate and build trust, not just put a brochure out there like we would have 10 or 20 years ago, each one of those pages likely gets its own lead generation offer. Because that lead generation offer, should it be a report, an ebook, a downloadable planning template, a webinar, an on-demand webinar, a quiz, a grader, something like that. The reality is to be competitive and to earn your way in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. We need to get you out of the vendor box as quickly as possible. We need to get you out of the commodity broker box as quickly as possible. And the fastest way to do that is to transform yourself, to transform your founding team members so they're seen more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders. And the way that comes together from a practical standpoint is sharing helpful tips and best practices that your particular ideal client, your particular buyer personas would find incredibly helpful when it comes to data center hardware, when it comes to data center software, when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to storage. And you could have a one-size-fits-all premium content offer with a chapter or section on each of those 4 areas. But what we tend to find is in a self-driven journey where people have no patience anymore for generalists and instead want to deal with specialists, it's way more likely that when your ideal clients go to look for answers to their biggest questions, solutions to their biggest challenges, ways to help them achieve their biggest goals, they're looking for something that's way more specific than it was as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. And 5 or 10 years ago, you'd be trying to just worry about like search engine marketing and search engine optimization on the right topics. And that's still a factor. But what's an even greater factor, especially when it comes to selling to IT professionals, is you're now competing for attention with all of the generative AI chat apps, with ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and Claude and Perplexity, in addition to competing for attention with the LinkedIn platform and the YouTube platform and webinars and podcasting. So yeah, your content, your educational content needs to be so good that it grabs the person that's scrolling by their virtual shirt collar and pulls them in, because it's so hyper specific to who they are and what they're currently working on. So one of the best ways for a new services company to establish a strong reputation that's aligned with the modern buyer's journey is to, instead of showing up like a vendor, instead of showing up as a professional services firm, which might have been okay 10 years ago, but is not nearly going to cut it today. It's so incredibly important for your executive team, your founders, your partners. I'm not talking about your channel partners, but like your equity partners, your shareholders in your company, the faces of the company, to be seen by professionals that have incredibly deep levels of expertise when it comes to anything and everything having to do with the biggest goals and challenges of their core buyer personas within their ideal client accounts, at the intersection of data center hardware and at the intersection of software and cybersecurity and storage. And the better job you do with being hyper specific to who they are and what they care about, the more likely it is that you really cut through the noise and resonate. So if you want to establish a strong positive reputation that aligns with how modern buyers that want the self-driven journey, that are getting like 83% or more of the way through this journey before they're open to having a conversation with you, we have to understand that the competitive battleground is now about getting in early and often, being seen in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context by the right people. Because by default, where most people in this category in data center services are going to try to hold up a really big sign and say, pay attention to me, is they're going to offline networking events and they're going to conferences. And more than likely, as a new firm, they're probably not buying a booth. They're probably not speaking. If they were speaking, they might be in a position to educate and build trust. The reality, though, is at a 2,500 person conference, there's typically only about 75 people that are speaking. In other words, only 3% of the people at that conference get to educate and build trust. Another 7% are the coworkers of the people that are educating and building trust. In other words, like they come along because their boss or a coworker of theirs is giving a keynote or leading a breakout session or on a panel or something like that. So altogether, that gets you to roughly 10% of conference attendees are either speaking or work with the person, coworker, colleague of the person who's speaking. So they can get to educate and build trust. Another 10% are typically people that are buying booths. They're not educating and building trust. They're just interrupting people that are walking around at the floor, looking for the open bar, looking for free food and free swag. And the vendors, for the most part, are hoping to capitalize on the goodwill that the speakers create. So that's 20% of the conference. The other 80% are attendees. And the reality is, if there's no attendees, there's no attention. There's no captive audience to sell to the exhibitors. There's no captive attention for the speakers to be speaking to. So this is kind of the ecosystem of what most people are doing by default. And you wonder why, when only 3% of the people at a conference get to educate and build trust, you wonder why so many people leave the conference wondering, like, what did I actually accomplish? Vendors selling to vendors as opposed to their ideal clients. Salespeople schmoozing other salespeople as opposed to their ideal clients. And that's a whole separate thing, is making sure that if you're going to go to conferences, not only that you focus on getting in that top 3%, but focus specifically on conferences where there's a very high percentage of the conference demographic that aligns really well with your ideal client profile. In other words, before you commit to attending, exhibiting, speaking at a conference, get their demographics, get their media kit from this year, and look at, according to what they project this year, what they had last year, how closely aligned is that with your ideal client profile? So in other words, their PDF, their media kit on the left-hand side of the screen, your ICP, your ideal client profile on the right-hand side of the screen, and do a comparison. Is it a very high match? Is it at least 80%? Is it approaching 100%? Or is it a very low match? Are you looking for a needle in a haystack? So these are some of the places that people go wrong when it comes to establishing a reputation. If you want to establish a strong, positive reputation as a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, put yourself in situations where you're seen as the teacher, the consultant, as the expert, as opposed to just another vendor. If you can get in that 3%, great. If not, instead of just doing paid events and earned events, which the reality of most earned events are actually pay to play in disguise. That's a whole separate Q&A for us to get into, but hosting your own small events. And this is where most people get messed up, is they think that they're chasing vanity metrics. They love the idea of being in an event where hundreds or thousands of people are, because they think that it's a numbers game, and eventually they'll bounce into the perfect person. Or at the minimum, they think that the conference organizer has a bigger brand than they do. So if they can just share a social media tile bragging about the fact that they're going to be attending or exhibiting or speaking at this event, they're hoping the conference organizer's brand rubs off a little bit on their brand. And along the same lines, they'll go to the event and they'll take the selfie to say, like, hey, look at me, I'm at this conference. I'm really credible because I'm at this conference. Their brand equals my brand. And the reality is, you're highly skeptical, highly technical, highly cynical IT buyers that you're selling to. They know exactly what you're doing. In order to engender trust, we need to put ourselves in a position where we're addressing what our prioritized buyer personas care most about. So when it comes to your services company, after you've defined the attributes of your ideal client, and again, for a new company, this is going to be best guess 1.0 version, usually aligned reasonably well to your previous jobs, your previous career experience or experiences as is the case if there's multiple co-founders. So you'll have an idea based on geographically where your ideal clients are located. For a services company, even though a lot of technology services can be done remotely, especially as a smaller company, usually most try to get a beachhead and their local and regional area where they can travel to their clients as often as they need to build strong know, like, and trust. And that goes very, very well to hosting your own events, because you'll get an even greater lift by getting multiple people from the same company to come to your educational event. So there's the geographic part of your ideal client profile. Size. Not every sized company is going to be a good fit for your outsourced data center services. Early on, you may consider taking on any client, no matter how small, even if they're wildly unprofitable. Over time, most data center professional services companies come to the conclusion that below 10 employees, below 50 employees, usually the budget is so low, it puts so much pressure on your firm that it may not be worthwhile. And along the same lines, usually at some point with enterprise clients, they get so big with the likelihood of, one, them outsourcing it to anyone at a certain point is very low. And second, them outsourcing it to a brand new startup-y kind of company is also exceedingly low. So for a company that's brand new to data center services, that's looking to establish its reputation, I would say a good back of the napkin to start with the size part of your ideal client profile, is probably targeting companies that have anywhere from 50 to 500 employees, or 50 to 1,000 employees, or something like that. And geographically that are within a half hour to an hour drive of where you're located, so you can get to your clients on a pretty regular basis. Early on, you also may want to consider getting a beachhead in one or two verticals, one or two industries where you have extreme specialization. So in other words, like prior to starting your services company, let's say, for example, that you'd spent nearly all of your career supporting data centers in healthcare and financial services, and your co-founder also has a lot of experience supporting data centers in healthcare. Well, it probably doesn't pay for you to go totally expansive when you have extreme expertise that's highly valuable to enterprises and operators with a high concentration of usage in highly regulated industries like healthcare and financial services. So those are some considerations for your ideal client profile. In terms of like hosting your own lunch and learns, breakfast seminars, webinars, like who should you invite? Well, that ideal client profile should help you build a target account list of the perfect 100, 200, 500 potential companies that are in the right geographic area, the right sizes, the right industries. And if you're that hyper specific in a particular region, it's probably somewhere between a couple dozen and a couple hundred potential companies if you're located in a major population center. So you have those anywhere from a couple dozen to a couple hundred companies. And then who are the ideal people that you want to build awareness, that you want to educate and build trust with in those organizations? Early on in the smaller companies, you probably are casting a pretty wide net to anyone that works in IT. As you get into the larger end of very large small businesses and more mid-market businesses, you'll probably want to get a little bit more specific to focus on people that work in infrastructure, operations, support, cybersecurity, the ones that align most closely with your four kinds of core services. So from that target account list, you're doing basic lead research. If you don't have a subscription to something already, LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a really good place to start with building out that list. And say, for argument's sake, there's 100 target accounts that you're going after. There may be anywhere from 5 to 25 or 50 people in those 100 target accounts. So you end up with a list of anywhere from 500 to, I don't know, a couple thousand people that work at those target accounts in IT related jobs that you'd love to get a foot in the door with and educate and build trust about your services. So what do you do next? You start inviting them to your events. How do you decide what to talk about at your events, by the way? This is your buyer personas. And again, for a brand new startup, your best hypothesis is usually where you're going to be, where you've had the most experience in your prior career for guessing who the best contact person is. And the smaller companies, it's as high as you can get. Usually it could be all the way up at the level of like a CTO or a VP of IT. In large, very large small businesses and mid-market, it may be more of a mid-level director or vice president or senior contributor, senior type of contributor. The reality is all of this is going to be a best guess. So what I would lean towards is be hyper specific about the kind of company and be reasonably open to who your first foot in the door, first couple of foot in the door is in a particular account. Because generally in smaller accounts, say the IT department has 10 people or 5 people that work in an IT team, it really doesn't matter who your first foot in the door is because everyone knows everyone else. If someone gets invited to cybersecurity best practices that every healthcare IT executive needs to know about in your regional area, if there's someone else on their team who is into cybersecurity, if they like what you're talking about, when you suggest, hey, who else should be attending, it spreads pretty quickly. So the name of the game with all of this is to provide a lot of value. Focus on the goals and the challenges that they're articulating in their own words. So this is basic like buyer persona research. Let's say for argument's sake, you end up with 5 or 10 big goals, 5 or 10 big challenges. You get about 10 topics, 12 topics. Every month for the next year, you tackle one of those topics at a time. So your monthly lunch and learn, your monthly breakfast seminar series, your monthly webinar series. And the goal is if you have access to a classroom that you can rent out by the hour or by the half a day relatively affordably, if you can barter that with a company that you're working with a company you belong to, again, these don't need to be huge events. 10 or 20 of the right people from the right client accounts in your local area that are attending and learning from you can have a game-changing impact on building fantastic sales opportunities. Because again, this isn't about pitching people. This is educating and building trust. And start with the goals and the challenges that they know they have in their own words. The better job you can do with framing your education to be seen as an extension, a natural extension of their professional development and the learning and development, the more likely it is that not only that they register and attend, but they start to tell their coworkers and they come back for part 2 and part 3 and part 4. And gradually you start to meet multiple people from that company and you start to realize that, wow, I'm getting pretty good surface area on that decision-making committee. It's inevitable that at some point this company is going to end up contracting with us for outsourced data center services. So that's what I would focus on for building a reputation as a new data center services company. Make everything about educating and building trust with the right people in the right companies in the right geographic regions in a way that they want to spend time with you because they see you and your founding team as some of the top experts in their region when it comes to anything and everything related to data center services. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how a new data center services company can establish its reputation. Next question. What do we have? What's up next? So now we're headed over into data center construction, real estate, and investment in capital. So the next question is all about how can a data center design and build firm attract clients? How does a company that's principally in the business of data center design and construction, data center design and build, attract clients? That is a terrific question. And the reason it's especially relevant is the data center ecosystem is divided up into 5 broad segments: data center operators, data center technology companies, data center facilities related companies, data center construction / real estate / investment. That's the sector we're talking about now, and outsourced sales and marketing. And over the last 10 years or so, the segment of data center construction, real estate, investment has lagged significantly the other 4 in terms of modernizing how they market and sell their company's core services. Hugely lag behind. The reality is most data center operators, co-location and hyperscale companies, and technology and facilities companies have been doing a great job with content marketing and thought leadership and digital lead generation, going all the way back to the early 2010s when marketing technology and sales technology and CRMs and LinkedIn and YouTube were really starting to pick up a lot of momentum. But for whatever reason, throughout most of the 2010s, data center construction, data center real estate, data center investment companies, data center design and build companies decided that our buyers are different. They don't use smartphones. They still have Blackberries. They're still using the fax machine. They still get newspapers delivered in their driveway. They're still heavily influenced by direct mail postcards. And they only learn things when they go to conferences. They never attend a webinar. They never use Google. They never watch a YouTube video. They never listen to a podcast. Our buyers are different. And we had a lot of research back then to completely disprove that. And it's only become more absurd over time. And the reason that we know that it's become more absurd over time is the excuse that they used to use is that their buyers were really old school, which at the time was some degree of baby boomers and the next generation that was even older than baby boomers 10 years ago. So we're in this place now where the baby boomers are generally the more veteran, seasoned, experienced generation in the data center industry, to the extent that many haven't retired yet. There's a lot of baby boomers that are still working as consultants and advisors on a part-time basis, on a fractional basis, more than full-time, but there's quite a few that are still working full-time. I can tell you without a doubt, from the standpoint of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, from the standpoint of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, I'm on the mid to young side of Gen X. All of the baby boomers that I'm friendly with that are anywhere from 10 to 15 years older than me, they're 60s, 70 somethings, that are still actively working in the data center industry, that still are highly engaged either on a full-time or part-time basis. They spend nearly all of their professional day tethered to their smartphones. When they're speaking at conferences, which given their expertise in the industry, they're in high demand to speak at conferences. If you want to tell how digitally savvy they are and you've attended one of their conferences, mention them, like, thanks speaker name. Great talk. Really learned a lot about liquid cooling and how to operationalize this to an ESG team. And when you mention them, even if it's pretty obvious that they're in that baby boomer generation, you'd be shocked how 9 times out of 10, within minutes, they're liking your comment, they're replying back and mentioning you, completely dispelling the idea that there's any critical mass left in and around the data center ecosystem that is digitally resistant. And that's essentially the problem with a lot of design and build companies, is they're acting as if their core ideal clients, their ICP, and their prioritized buyer personas are in this somewhere weird, anachronistic time warp involving flux capacitors or something like that, for whatever reason, doesn't have an iPhone or doesn't have an Android, doesn't have a smartphone. And they're not on LinkedIn all day long. And they don't watch YouTube videos. And they don't use ChatGPT. And they don't use Copilot. And talk to your friends, talk to your core buyer personas that meet that demographic, and do your own homework, do your own research. But the reality is, when it comes to data center design and build companies attracting clients, they should largely be using the same playbook that everyone else is using throughout the data center ecosystem. There's a consultation a couple of weeks back from a company that very well established as a construction and engineering firm, adjacent to the data center space, more industrial, more commercial, and wants to get more aggressively involved in data centers. That obviously you don't have to look far to realize how much growth and demand there is for construction of AI fuel data centers that are going on right now. So yeah, it's largely the same playbook for a design and a build firm that wants to attract clients. Get really tight about that ideal client profile. Geographically, where can you design and build data centers? That should be a relatively straightforward one. If you don't have architects, if you don't have construction crews in a geographic region, well, you're probably not including that particular region in your geographic coverage. For a lot of firms that design and build, they either operate nationally or they operate regionally, like a cluster of countries if they're in Europe or something like that, where the countries are a little more closely together. But so there's the geographic part, there's the size part. And generally, in order to sell directly to major data center developers and sell to the big hyperscalers, you generally have to be a pretty large company yourself. Otherwise, you're typically going to be a subcontractor that's selling to a general contractor who actually owns the relationship. And the smaller your firm is, the more likely it is that you're ideally suited to be a subcontractor. The larger your firm is, the more likely it is that you have the resources and the hundreds or the thousands of employees and the tens of millions or hundreds of millions in capital that you need to, or billions in capital that you need to realistically be involved in those kinds of massive projects on a global scale. So that's the size part of your ideal client profile. Industry doesn't tend to come up quite as often with design and build as it does within other facets of the data center industry. But if you've noticed over time that your best clients tend to be, I don't know, telecommunications companies or healthcare entities that build their own data centers or co-location operators or something like that, if you see that pattern recognition, by all means, think about the industry part of your ideal client profile. But more than likely, it's a company size and a geo play. And from there, you should be able to build out a target account list of your ideal couple dozen or a couple hundred. Could be a couple thousand. It's usually for designing and building data centers. It's usually a couple dozen or a couple hundred potential companies where you need significantly more reach, significantly more surface area, significantly more opportunity to educate and build trust than you currently have today. And among those couple dozen, those couple hundred companies, think through who the most important stakeholders are that are typically involved in your purchase decisions. Are they vice presidents of data center development? Are they chief operating officers? Are they chief financial officers? On the investor sides, are they a limited partner? Again, your business model and your size will dictate the kind of personas and the size companies that you're going after. But again, the general framework is to figure out who the 2 or 3 most important prioritized kinds of buyers that you want to build relationships with. Prioritize those. There's never enough resources to go around to cover them all equally. So prioritize on where you believe you're going to have the strongest economic financial impact. And then for your top 2 or 3 segments, get their insights. Figure out how to be more client-centric for each of those groups. In other words, in their own words, what are their 5 or 6 big goals that they're working on that are directly related to design and build of data centers? What are their 5 or 6 biggest frustrations, challenges, or struggles when it comes to design and build of data centers? And repeat that same research for your secondary and potentially your tertiary segments. And then within each of those segments, you end up with 5 or 6 goals, 5 or 6 challenges. That gives you 10 or 12 topics. Those 10 or 12 topics are the 10 or 12 topics that I want you to address once a month systematically for the next 10 or 12 months for the next year. So this helps you back into having a monthly breakfast seminar series, a monthly lunch and learn series, a monthly after hours education kind of program, a monthly webinar series. And the goal is quite simply to get multiple people from these target companies to attend your educational events and learn from your internal experts about how they can do their job better. Not what you want to sell them on, but how they can learn from your experts about how to achieve their professional goals individually, as a company, as a team, and how they can close the gap on some of their biggest stressors, some of their biggest challenges, some of their biggest struggles. Again, the titles of these events should literally be their own words, what they told you when you did that buyer persona research. And even better, if you can get multiple stakeholders from the same company attending together. And by multiple, it could be initially month 1, month 2, it could be 2 people. And then those 2 people are blown away and they're like, you know what? Next time we got to invite Susan and Colin along with us. So there's 4 people that registered and attended. And all of a sudden you get to the point that like, wow, you know, our conference room that seats 20 people is getting kind of cozy. We need a bigger room, or we need to break these out into smaller groups. Or for a larger company where there's 5 or 6 people all attending together, float the idea of just coming in and speaking in their own office. So you cover the whole company, cover the whole department, cover the whole team, not just the 5 or 6 people who attend live. And as with any good trusted advisor, any teacher, any consultant, any thought leader, record all of these. There are always going to be people that attend that say like, oh, you know what? One people that works with me couldn't attend. Can I get the slides or can I get the recording so I can give it to them or give it to my boss? I'm like, yeah, for sure. And there's lots of different ways that you can repurpose this. But at the end of the day, if you want to attract great clients in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, we got to get you out of the commodity vendor box. We got to get you out of being seen as just a design and build vendor. And we instead need to get you seen and your client-facing team members as seen as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything related to design and build of data centers for this particular type of stakeholder in this geographic region for roughly this company size. And the more you do this over and over and over again, you will attract fantastic clients. You'll attract fantastic sales opportunities. And most of all, they'll be spending a lot of those 28 touch points with you and your team members, to the point where you not only get on the short list, you stay on the short list, and you start to influence the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options, the competitive options that are in front of you, which not only tortures your competitors, but in many cases, when they're spending so much time in their professional development and their learning and development process, learning from you, your competitors start to literally drop off of that short list. In other words, you've neutralized those competitive forces by having fantastic professional development and learning development for your most important prospects and clients. They're quoting your methodology. They're using your criteria to frame how they're planning this whole big design and build initiative. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how a data center design and build firm can attract more of the right clients. Lead with being an integral part of your core buyer persona's professional development and learning and development process to attract the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So those prospects and clients see your client-facing team members as not only super approachable, super easy to work with, but brilliant when it comes to the insights that you've shared with them on how they can do their job better, how their team can win more often, how their company can achieve some of their biggest challenges when it comes to designing and building data centers. If you're getting really good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we'll come back in the second half of this week's show and address 3 more of the biggest sales and marketing challenges.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, our weekly live show where each week we address a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or challenge that you're facing that you think would be great to address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So what is up next? Now we're going to head over into facilities construction, in particular, how a data center facilities construction business can improve how clients purchase its offering, how a data center facilities construction business can improve how its clients purchase its offering. So typically, when I hear that kind of question, it's usually a company that's selling one small but very important piece of the puzzle when it comes to building a data center facility, building a data center campus. And what they're looking for essentially is a competitive advantage that makes their company way more attractive to do business with than other options that are in front of their prospects and clients. And usually this is a 2-part question. This is a 2-pronged approach with all of this. So when it comes to how your clients purchase your offering, there's 2 different people in your organization that I would loop into this conversation. For starters, facilities infrastructure kind of companies almost always have product teams, product management team, VPs of product, chief product officers, whereas construction companies typically do not usually have that as a core title. Technology companies always have product managers. A lot of operators have project managers. A lot of companies that sell facilities related products and services have product managers, but sometimes the personas don't. But at the end of the day, for you to improve your offering and how your clients purchase your offering, this is something that you typically want to bring in your most senior leadership from your product team. Sometimes this is also hand in hand with your innovation leader. Like, for example, on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast that I host, I've interviewed some people that are product manager, product leader titles. And then I've also interviewed some people that are heavily involved in innovation, like they go to a lot of conferences and speak about these issues. Both are very, very valuable to figuring out how to work through this particular issue. The second type of person that I would bring in for how to purchase your offering is I would bring in sales leadership, both on the pre-sales and on the post-sales side. So account executives and account managers, and potentially marketers who may end up doing a lot of the execution for improving the overall, how to get rid of a lot of the friction and a lot of complaints about how your clients are currently purchasing your offering. But at the end of the day, this is a product roadmap issue. This is a competitive positioning issue. This is getting closer to your clients to understand what specifically they're frustrated about with how they purchase your offering. So this is beyond just buyer personas. This is like, okay, tell me when you've approached this kind of initiative in the past, what's been the criteria that you used? How did you decide to prioritize this initiative? When you go through this process, what are typically the steps that are most relevant for you? If you could wave a magic wand and make it way easier to do business with a company like ours, what would that look like? So yes, this is related to buyer persona research that marketers go through, but it's a lot more closely related to like Canvas type of discussions that a product manager would go through. So what you're most likely going to discover is exactly the path that's been illuminated by Gartner and Edelman and all of these other studies in the last couple of years, that your buyers don't want to spend a lot of time with salespeople anymore. They want to do as much self-driven research as possible. They are empowered to use tools, digital tools, more than they've ever been before. 10 years ago, it was super common to find that a lot of your buyers were looking things up on Google and asking questions on social media and watching videos on YouTube and attending webinars and listening to podcasts. All of that still exists today. However, in addition to all of that, we have a whole other category of tools and platforms that you now have to compete with for attention. The LLM chat apps, the large language model chat apps, generative AI. So in addition to all of the search and all the social tools that people are using 10 years ago, now today they're doing a ton of research on their own through ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity, Gemini, Claude, Grok. And this is a really, really big deal. So the bizarre irony is the very platforms that are creating crazy amounts of growth in our industry are actually making it considerably harder for you to get in early and for you to get in often. Because now all of a sudden, your sales professionals can't just be sales professionals anymore. They're literally competing for attention against the conversations that people are having with their chat apps. And in order for them to provide more value than the chat apps, they really have to be experts. They have to be consultants. That's why we're seeing a very, very strong preponderance of companies that are specializing sales teams by verticals and increasingly are hiring experts into sales related roles. So we see, for example, among data center operators, we're seeing people hire technologists that have such strong technology chops that they could in reality, that they have training and certification credentials that look like at least an SMB IT professional. So in other words, more than likely they're selling to small business and mid-market, in some cases for enterprises, but the people that are successful in like these co-location sales jobs have strong enough technical chops that they could be a fractional CTO for small and medium-sized businesses as a nights and weekends gig if they wanted to. More than likely, they don't have time to do it, but they have the skills and the expertise to do it. So in other words, their prospects and clients see them as a peer, not a pushy salesperson. And we're seeing the exact same thing happen across facilities and construction. We're seeing a lot more people in sales leadership roles that are engineers by background. And that's incredibly important because a huge part of the core buyer personas that they're selling to have that same common engineering background. So again, they don't see you as an account executive or an account manager. They see you as a peer. So much so that you may have even worked with your persona at a previous job or knew them from a previous ecosystem where you would have seen each other as peers. So when you see that going on, you realize just how much the game has changed. And that's the reason why in order for you to earn your way in early and often in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, your prospects and clients have to see your client-facing team members as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything related to your segment within data center facilities construction. And it's not easy. So what do we do from a practical standpoint, where we need to get really specific on who the companies are, really specific on who the prioritized buyers are, and lead with education? Because in order for us to compete with the immediate gratification that they're getting from the chat apps, we essentially need to be part of our prioritized buyer persona's learning and development, their professional development process. And the way we do that is by becoming extraordinarily client-centric. So this is like buyer personas on steroids. It's not only understanding who the personas are and prioritizing which comes first, which gets the most amount of resources, which comes second, which get the second most amount of resources, but getting extreme clarity on their 5 or 6 biggest goals in their own words, and extreme clarity on their 5 or 6 biggest struggles in their own words, and taking those 10 or 12 topics and one by one systematically offering fantastic world-class professional development, learning and development experiences for the right people in those right companies. And the titles of these programs are so hyper-specific that they're nearly impossible for the right person to ignore. And because it's nearly impossible for the right person to ignore, when you send them a confirmation that says, hey, great to see that you registered. Oh, by the way, who else from your company would benefit from attending? Typically, when it comes to data center facilities construction, there's people that are involved in architecture, there's people involved in provisioning, subcontracting, engineering, whatever it is that's particular to your particular category. So finance, operations. So with that in mind, who else from your team, who else from your company would benefit from attending? Simply hit the forward button, add a thought or two on why this matters. And teams that learn together tend to grow together. And from your perspective, if you can get multiple people from the same company attending your breakfast seminars, your lunch and learns, your after hours events, your webinar series, fantastic things start to naturally happen. You get out of the vendor box. You get out of being just the one who's competing for the lowest bid. You get out of being commoditized. And instead, they're hanging on your every word. They're listening to your insights and advice on how other companies and other stakeholders in those companies have navigated these exact goals, have overcome these very challenges by using your methodology. And the methodology that they're learning about from your educational events, they take back to their team. And that becomes what they use to align around and rally around for how to drive this whole initiative. So it's a matter of understanding the process they go through, showing up how they want you to show up. But when it comes to purchasing, they're offering, listen to them. In a lot of cases, you may be selling the same way you did 10 years ago, and that's not how they want to buy. They may tell you that they want to have the ability to get to a person, but 90% of the time, they want an experience that looks a little bit more like e-commerce. And that may be very, very jarring for someone that's in sales development or an account executive to hear. But the reality is technology is going to win. And if you don't implement this technology that makes it easier for your clients and prospects to do business with, they're going to choose your competitor who does. So what this really is a deer in headlights moment is it may be upsetting to a lot of people on your go-to-market team who haven't kept their skill sharp or aren't seen as deep experts, subject matter experts that make it having a lot more favorable conversation with their prospects and clients. But this is the change that's happening. And this is the reason why we're seeing a lot more specialization by industry, a lot more people being hired into these roles that look a lot more like the peers of their prospects and clients. And this is why increasingly you're seeing so many companies throughout the data center ecosystem, especially in facilities related construction, invest quite aggressively in roadshows and other similar kinds of events. One, because compared to the cost of these massive national and global conferences, it's way, way, way less expensive. And second, the precision is off the charts. You literally can't compete with the precision of these kinds of events that you host yourself, your own events, compared to national conferences. A typical national or global conference, 97% of the people who attend don't get to educate and build trust. Only 3% get to speak. So 97% of the people are behind the 8 ball at the outset. And then when you compare your ideal client profile against their demographics, you may also discover that the majority of the people that are attending don't align well with your prioritized buyer personas and your ideal clients. So you may be enamored by these vanity metrics that, oh, wow, there's thousands of people in the room. We have to be there. Our competitors are there. The reality is you consistently getting 10, 20, 30 people in a room who are from your perfect target accounts, who are from your perfect roles, can have so much more of an impact than begging for 30 seconds, 90 seconds of their attention when they're running by your booth to try to collect more swag from different booths and get to the open bar and the free hors d'oeuvres, or get to the cocktail party, or whatever it is, that has absolutely nothing to do with you having an opportunity to educate and build trust with the right people. So even if the right people are there, they're in totally the wrong frame of mind to be paying attention to your deeply niched experts. So we need to really, really rethink how we show up. We need to rethink how we're positioned. And most of all, we need to align ourselves to be a significant part of their learning and development process, their professional development process. And that alone makes it a lot more likely that you have a trusted relationship with those prospects and clients, makes it a lot more likely that they're going to want to do business with your company in that context, because they see your sales team as an extension of this fantastic educational event experience that you host. But don't overlook the fact that when it comes to how you can improve how clients purchase your offering, self-service purchasing, self-service onboarding, self-service resources, this is the reason why ChatGPT and Copilot and all the other generative AI tools have crazy levels of adoption in an incredibly short period of time. It's incredibly difficult for you to compete head to head with that unless you're really, really listening to what your prospects and clients want in terms of their customer experience, their client experience, their partner experience. So I would encourage you to take all of that into account and respect and very carefully listen to how much their preferences have changed in recent years, and stop trying to sell to them the same way that you did 5, 10, 15 years ago. Generative AI, OpenAI, ChatGPT, and all the other related chat apps is next level, way beyond just what they're getting from LinkedIn and what they're getting from YouTube and what they're getting from podcasts and webinars and self-service tools. So the question is, are you going to compete with a mindset that lives in the present and lives in the future? Or are you trying to sell to someone that you think still has a fax machine and has a BlackBerry and still reads the newspaper that comes in their driveway and only learns from the 300-page trade publication that comes to their mailbox once or twice a month? The world has changed. It isn't just Gen Z. It isn't just millennials. It's everyone. Even baby boomers have tremendously changed their purchase preferences for everything throughout nearly all of the data center ecosystem. The only question is, are you showing up where they want you to show up? Are you showing up in the way that they want you to show up? Are you providing value? Are you providing a world-class client experience that aligns with their modern preferences? Or are you looking for the DeLorean from Back to the Future and trying to live in the past when the world has changed already? So those are all the considerations that I'd be thinking about for how a data center facilities construction company can improve how its clients purchase its offering. Okay, what is up next? Next question is, how does a data center operations optimization company generate leads? So you have a professional services firm and you specialize in data center operations optimization. In other words, you're working for data center operations team members and you're helping them better optimize their data center environments. And usually, it's interesting. On operations, you could have tech parts that have to do with technology. You could have parts that do with facilities. It's usually the intersection of the two. So the question, you need to be clear also on which parts of usually you're optimizing holistically. So when you're optimizing holistically, usually your main point of contact is on the facility side and secondary input coming from the technologists. But in a smaller facility, it's usually just a data center manager. And that you end up as like your core persona. If it's really small, then that person usually is in a pretty seasoned level. In larger companies, you tend to have much more granular titles. But at the end of the day, it's like, what do you want to be known for? And if operations optimization is really your niche, let's get really specific about the who, the where, the why, or the how. So in terms of the who, from a data center operations perspective, because facilities are such an important part of that, as you define the geographic part of your ideal client profile, you're more than likely going to anchor on geographic regions where you have physical presence. In other words, where you have offices, where you have team members, where you have contractors, where you have channel partners who can physically go to that facility for site surveys, for installing, for your original optimization engagements, and for ongoing optimization engagements as part of your core professional services. So there's definitely going to be geographic constraints because of the nature of what you do. There's also usually size constraints. So depending on how big or small your company is, you'll likely come up with different program levels that align with different size data center facilities. And this sometimes aligns with deciding that, for example, you do really well with data center operators like co-location and hyperscalers, but you struggle with enterprise facilities. Or maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you do really well with enterprise data centers, but struggle with outsourced data center operators. Or maybe you're fine with either of those. So once you anchor into which parts, which kinds of business models are the best fit for you, usually it's a matter of getting your productized services packages in good enough shape so that you have some recognition as to what like your minimum level of engagement is. And that minimum level of engagement, say in the US, for example, it's a $50,000 annual engagement. And for that $50,000 annual engagement, you found that over time, for your minimum program, that they need to have at least 50 employees doing $10 million a year to be able to afford that, or whatever it is. So with that in mind, that's like the lower end of the range for your ideal client profile. And there's typically an upper end of the range. If you are part of a huge company that provides operations optimization, you conceivably may have no ceiling as to how big a company you could potentially sell to. You can sell to Fortune 500, Fortune 50 enterprises that have their own data centers. You can sell to some of the biggest data center operators on the planet. But for most companies that are deeply niched as a professional services firm that would specialize in operations optimization, your company probably has anywhere between a couple handfuls, a couple dozen, maybe at the most a couple hundred employees. And if you're on the lower end of that range, a couple of handfuls to a couple dozen employees, there usually is a finite limit as to how big of a client account you can realistically handle with your company's core capabilities. Meaning that if you're outsourcing operations optimization as for a enterprise with tens of thousands of employees or hundreds of thousands of employees, usually the safety preference from their side is they want to do business only with companies that are larger than your company is. There's exceptions to that, but for the most part, if you're on the smaller side of a couple handfuls or a couple dozen, your sweet spot is probably somewhere between companies that have, say, 50 employees and 1,000 employees, or 50 employees and 5,000 employees, or something like that. Is it possible that you could do business directly with Digital Realty or Equinix or IBM or General Electric or something, or Microsoft or something? Anything's possible. The reality is generally the larger the company is, the more the financial requirements, the legal requirements, the compliance requirements, the integration requirements, the staffing requirements, a whole host of things that your company may not be ready for. So get really dialed in onto how big or how small. I call this Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold with the porridge, not too big, not too small. And the more self-aware you are about how big they need to be to afford your minimum, and at what point the opportunity, likelihood of it progressing and landing and expanding and everything is just falls off the cliff, get clear on the upper end of the range. And then the business models that are a particularly good fit. That will help you have real extreme clarity on that ideal client profile. That will give you what you need to build out your target account list. Usually for this kind of company, depending on whether you have local coverage, regional coverage, national coverage, multinational coverage, will dictate how many potential companies you could be doing business with that fit in that size and geographic parameter. It's usually at the minimum of a few dozen, most often would be a few hundred. In some cases, it could be thousands of potential client accounts at the company level. Then within those accounts, who are the core people? You'll know who the core people are because when you look at your 10 or 20 most lucrative accounts that you love working with, the ones that are in your testimonials and case studies section on your website, your logos on your website, you go into your CRM and you look at like, oh, across these 10 or 20 best accounts that we have, who are the key people that engage with us pre and post purchase? those key people will help you back into who your prioritized buyer personas are. So for, again, an operations optimization, it could be an operations manager, it could be a facilities manager, it could be just a data center manager, or it could be a completely different role depending on your area of specialization, their size. Generally, the larger the account, the more granular the job titles are, the smaller the account you're selling to, the more likely it is that there's broader job titles with one person taking on what would be several different job roles and bigger companies. So with all that in mind, that should help you figure out who your first and your second most important personas are, your primary and secondary. We need to be really client-centric, understand what's going on in their world, and then from a deep understanding of their goals and challenges in their own words, we use that to develop our lead generation strategy. And our lead generation strategy should revolve around and respect the fact that most of your ideal prospects and clients don't want to spend a lot of time with sales teams anymore. They're more sales allergic than they've ever been. So in order for us to be able to earn our way in the formative stages of the buyer's journey, especially in the awareness and the consideration stages, leading with helpful educational content is incredibly important, especially if we want to compete head to head with the immediate gratification that they're getting from having a conversation about your category with ChatGPT or Copilot or a similar kind of generative AI tools. So in order for us to one up the value prop that you can provide, it's almost always because the kind of people that you're hiring look a lot more like peers to the people they're selling to than they ever have in the past. And second, they're getting access to what in a lot of ways feels like almost free consulting. And again, you deciding how much of that expertise to give away as part of the pre-sales process versus holding it back for a consulting engagement, that's a whole separate Q&A that we could talk for a half hour to an hour about. But at the end of the day, for you to be able to provide more value than your prospects and clients can get from having a similar conversation with a chat app, it's a different kind of hire. It's a different kind of upskilling. It's a different kind of cross-training. It's a different kind of leveling up. It changes the nature of who is on your team going forward. It changes the nature of you investing in the right people that give them the leverage that they need to have these fantastic conversations with your prospects and clients, because this is the backbone of lead generation. This is what enables these folks to be speakers at your own events, at your own educational events where you're educating and building trust. And that's the core part with all of this, is we need to put your internal subject matter experts in a place where they can educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they're seen as the be-all end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with data center operations optimization for a specific kind of stakeholder and a specific kind of company in a specific region of roughly that size. And when you do that at an elite world-class level, your prospects and clients keep coming back to keep learning from your experts, and they bring their coworkers along with them, and gradually you increase your surface area in that company among key members, among multiple stakeholders on the decision committee about anything and everything that's directly or indirectly related to data center operations optimization. And the registrations for those events are your leads. As they attend the leads, those leads become incredibly nurtured. As they become incredibly nurtured, many of them will naturally progress on to becoming sales opportunities, and the kind of sales opportunities that everyone loves to work on because they come in already educated about what you do and already trusting your company. It's a game-changing impact on how you approach your whole go-to market. So that's what I'd be thinking about as a professional services firm that specializes in data center operations optimization, how your company can generate leads. That brings us to our final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. If you've been getting good value so far from this week's live show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments, and we'll add that into the consideration queue of topics to address in upcoming episodes. And if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources like this directly to your email inbox on Sundays, make sure you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on our website. You can do so for free at www.dcsmi.com. So what is our final question for this week? We're getting a lot of questions this week about construction, which is fantastic. as I've mentioned a few times before, a lot of times construction companies are really lagging in terms of modernizing their go-to-market playbook, which is crazy because they're selling to a lot of the same stakeholders that buy from data center operators and that buy from and partner with operators and technology and facilities companies and investors. And we know their preferences. If you want to be competitive, you really have to understand your buyer preferences and show up how they want you to show up, not how you'd like to show up, but becoming client centric, giving them what they want. So, how does a data center construction, installation, and maintenance company improve its direct sales? How does a data center construction, installation, and maintenance company improve its direct sales? I like the fact that they're using the term direct sales because what that implies is they're also thinking about indirect sales. Indirect sales usually means that in this context, that you're a subcontractor of a general contractor. Direct versus indirect in other parts of the ecosystem usually equates to being seen as like a channel partner, like a relationship between an operator, data center operator, technology or facilities company. And channel partners would be entities like managed service providers, network integrators, technology consultancies, master agent type of relationships for data center. Real estate firms for data center operators, sometimes it's real estate agents as like a channel partner. But in this particular context, when a construction, installation, and maintenance company is talking about direct sales versus indirect sales, I think what they're referring to is like the general contractor owns the relationship as opposed to the subcontractor who works for the general contractor. So when it comes to direct sales, a lot of it is being self-aware about your size and your resources relative to the size and resources of the book of business that you're going after. For your company as a data center construction, installation, and maintenance company to have direct sales with huge companies like Fortune 1000 kind of companies, billion-dollar companies, you typically need to be a pretty large construction, maintenance, installation company yourself. May not be exactly as big, but you should be in the upper echelon, the top 1%, top 10% in terms of size, in terms of your resources, in terms of your headcount, your capitalization, essentially what you bring to the table. Because from the perspective of the prospects and clients, they equate size to safety. Now, if you've been in this space long enough, I'm sure you know plenty of horror shows with companies, huge companies that have dropped the ball, and mid-sized companies and small companies that have dropped the ball. But other things being equal, the mantra that nobody ever got fired for buying IBM is still very much alive and well throughout most of the data center ecosystem. And generally, for you to sell direct for these massive construction, installation, and maintenance projects, you typically need to be a relatively massive or approaching massively sized company yourself. If you're more small to mid-size, well, generally the direct relationships that you'll be able to successfully land and maintain and grow over time will more than likely be the smaller kinds of projects that may be, to a certain degree, under the radar screen of their really big companies. So at the end of the day, you may have really deep expertise in a certain facet or all facets of coordinating construction of these data centers. But a lot of it is deciding whether you long-term want to be a subcontractor to larger general contractors or whether you want to have direct relationships. A consultation with someone earlier this year going through exactly that. And what a lot of people that have spent their entire career as subcontractors are terrified of, that the general contractors that they sell to aren't going to like it. Of course, they're not going to like it. They're an intermediary. They're profiting off of your skills and expertise and taking a margin. Of course, they're doing a tremendous amount of work. They're taking on a lot of liability. They're taking a lot of risk. But yeah, if you want to be able to sell directly to these companies and be able to retain them long-term, it is incredibly important that you're self-aware about what they want, what they perceive as safety, and what you're actually able to deliver from a direct sales perspective. And I think as the underdog, it's more important than ever to lead with education and to be out in front with publishing great content and showing great videos. And most companies in construction, installation, and maintenance lead with credentials and awards. And I would argue that in the world we live in now, the credentials and the awards are important, but they're no longer sufficient as differentiators. They're just not. The world is so hyper competitive now that it's not just a matter of having the credentials and not just having the awards. It's that plus having a trusted brand. How do we get a trusted brand? By getting the right people in the right companies to see your people, your internal subject matter experts, as some of the smartest, most knowledgeable, creative, innovative people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center construction, installation, and maintenance. And in most cases, the most effective way to be able to demonstrate that is by using education, by being seen more as a consultant, a teacher, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader. So we have to get much more specific about the kinds of accounts that we're going after and who the right people are in these accounts that we want to be building these direct sales relationships with. But yeah, make no mistake, you will ruffle feathers among the general contractors that you've historically worked through when they see that you want to go direct with some of these relationships, even among smaller accounts. But at the end of the day, your business, your brand, your company deciding what you ultimately want to specialize in. This is for sure a point of contention. I think it's going to continue to be a point of contention, but it's an enormous opportunity for the companies that are able to get out in front of this. And if I was leading commercial revenue development, whatever you want to call it, for this kind of company, I would focus on having an incredible presence with video content that you distribute through the 3-4 different places on YouTube, the 3-4 different places on LinkedIn, so that by the time one of your prospects and clients meets face-to-face from someone from your team, they've already consumed several minutes, perhaps even several hours of content from that person. So they already have dramatically accelerated the know, like, and trust. And that's the unlock on the innovative companies that are going to win, is that they're using education to build trust and accelerate the relationship building. So by the time you have your first face-to-face relationship, which in a self-driven buyer's journey is the final 17%, 83% is self-driven, they've consumed a ridiculous amount of incredibly valuable content that teaches them everything that they need to know to do their job better. Not what you want to sell them on, not, yay, clap for us, we have all these credentials and awards that we've won. No. It's all about them. It's about being client-centric and teaching them valuable skills that can help them do their job better when it comes to these data center construction, installation, and data center maintenance projects, and how it helps them achieve their goals that are sitting in their objectives and key results, and what their team is working on, what their company is working on, and what they're struggling with most. The more your educational content and educational event experience proactively does that, the more you strongly stack the decks in your favor for improving the direct sales experience way before that first face-to-face meeting. In a world where 83% of the action is happening before you meet a prospecting client, getting in early and often in as many of those 28 touch points as possible, and the awareness and the consideration stages of the journey is the new competitive battleground. And in order to do that well, you're competing head-to-head with ChatGPT and the ChatGPT-like apps. So the question is, are your internal subject matter experts up for that challenge? And are they going to step up and compete? Or are they going to bury their heads in the sand and pretend like none of this matters, and they're going to sell the same way they did 10 or 20 years ago? Ultimately, the question is, the choice is yours, but that's what I'd be thinking about for how a data center construction, installation, and maintenance company can improve its direct sales. So that's the final question that we're going to be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you have an idea for a topic or question or challenge you'd like to see addressed in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration set for upcoming topics to address. If you want to stay in the loop and get invited to upcoming educational events just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. You can do so for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be sure to send me a connection invite. And it's incredibly important that you put in the connection invite that you're a fan of, that you like to watch the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, so that I can prioritize your invitation. So I'm so glad that you were able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. We wish you, your team, and your company tremendous success in capitalizing on these generational opportunities that exist among data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.